Hi everybody. I'm going to spend a little time and go over life expectancy. It's in your NDD or nature deficit disorder. I am attaching it to this email again, although this is 1 year old, but it's the same as the one I handed out. So you can use this one. Remember how to turn these in when you're done with them. You can, if you have access to a copier that can scan and generate a PDF, that's great. Or you can take pictures of each one, insert it into either Word or PowerPoint, and then save that as a single PDF, and then send it to me. Right, remember to have your name, Bill Smith, and then the assignment. Right, this one's the GPS or nature deficit disorder. Right, and it has to be written by hand. Otherwise, we've had instances in the past where one person types it, everybody else copies it. Okay, so we're going to talk a little about life expectancy. First about people, and then kind of some odd things with some creatures. So if you look at the x-axis here, and I show this one in my medicinal chemistry class right at the beginning because it tells us where we are as a species, really, if you go back in time. So this is 1800, right? So a little over 200 years ago is right in this area, and you can see the life expectancy range from 26 to 35. It depends upon where you live. So that meant if you lived in a town, now there were people in their 40s and 50s and 60s, but there were also a lot more, babies and small children that died than they do now. But you can go over here and see that these are correlated with where you live. Right? Oceania is basically the Pacific, Australia, those areas, and then you have Europe, North and South America, right, Asia, and then the average for the world, right? But you can see if you go down here, the average for the world, not that long ago, 200 years ago, the average life expectancy was under 30 years old. It was about 28 years. And now the average life expectancy for the world is up around 73 years. Okay, so in 200 years, the life expectancy has improved over 40 years. If you think about that, that's incredible, right? That's what technology has done. Okay, and so if you ever see those shows, let's go back to the good old days. In the good old days, a bunch of you guys would be considered middle-aged now, right, or getting in to be a little bit older, whereas now you're just like looking forward to the rest of your life. So, but that's a really important statistic when you go through that geography packet. You're going to see life expectancies that are still very low, right? And so they have a completely different life than we do. A lot of things contribute to that. Dirty water, for example, is considered one of the top things. There's a rule of thumb that in third world or developing countries, 75% of the people that die of premature death get their disease one way or another from their water supply, right? And so it could be anything from parasites to malaria, right? So there's all sorts of ways that you can die, although there's a parasite associated with malaria. But, bacterial infections, viral infections, insects, things like that can end up getting you. Okay? So let's look at Japan has among the very highest. It's about 4 or 5 years higher overall than the United States. But this is kind of a general trend, right? So this is from 1947, right? And so you guys might have, say, grandparents that were alive in 1947. But in 1947, it was right after World War II, the life expectancy of a Japanese man was roughly 49 or 50, and a Japanese woman was 53 or 54, right? And so we'll just say, for the sake of argument, that, about 52. And now if you look up here, you can see men are living to 81, women are living to 87. So we'll just average it and say about 84. So you're going from 52 to 84, right? That's over 30 years. The life expectancy has improved in Japan, right, which is a very populated country, for men and women. Okay, and that's just over a span of about 70 years. Okay, so not a long period of time, right? And so what you're starting to see is how our society has changed so much in a fairly short period of time. Okay, so if you were, living back in 1947 and you hit 50, the clock was ticking. And so things have changed dramatically. Now 50, you might be considered mid-career in some areas, right? You're going to work until you're 70 or 75 or something like that. Okay. So this is, if you look at this one, on the x-axis is the life expectancy of men, males, right? And you see it, and this is in present day, more or less. It might be 2018 or something like that. And on the y-axis is life expectancy of females, okay? And then you can see they have it by, there's different countries here. Right now, a lot of them you might recognize, right? The USA, UK is England, right? Ukraine, Russia, right? Ethiopia. But there's also small ones, like Macau is a tiny country off the coast of China that basically survives on gambling. It's like a gambling, because you're not allowed to gamble in China, so a lot of the rich people in China go to Macau and they gamble. But what you see here is if they were the same, if men and women were the same, it would be right on this line. But what you see consistently is that women live longer than men, right? And you saw in Japan, we just looked at it, right? Women lived about 5 or 6 years on average longer than men. One of the ones that's kind of an oddity is Russia. In Russia, I think that's the country that has the biggest difference between men and women. Women live on average something like 13 or 14 years longer than men. And they attribute that to two things. One is, if you look at Russia, not just Moscow, but Russia, most of Russia is wide open, right? So there's a lot of, and it's very cold. So there's a lot of jobs that are out, cutting down trees, mining, things of that nature that just wear people out, physically wear them out. So it leads to an earlier death. And the other thing is Russia is famous for having an incredibly high number of alcoholics that drink a lot of vodka, right? And they're typically men, right? And they not only do they suffer diseases from the vodka, it also leads to bad decisions and everything from, street fights to, car accidents. So there's some anomalies in there. But rule of thumb is that women outlive men. If we went back about 100 years, and this difference right here is an average of around 4 to 6 years. If you went back like 100 years, that number would be wider. Women would have outlived men by 10 to 12 years in a lot of countries. Okay. So this is a map of the United States, and it's a life expectancy by different areas, almost by counties, really. Okay, so what's good is if you're green or blue, you're living longer, right? And if you're yellow or red, red's the worst, you're living less. And it's a little bit hard to see, but you can see the very red one here is 66. So that means if you're really red, like say this part of Alaska, you can see there's parts in here that are getting pretty red, right? And this right up here, for example, is West Virginia and Kentucky, right? So that's Appalachia. That's a very poor area. This is right along the Mississippi River, right? You have Arkansas, Mississippi, Memphis is in there. If you go up here where it's kind of red and it kind of sticks out, that's what we studied earlier in the semester, the Bacon oil field area, right? So a lot of men are moving there. It's a rough area, right? Hard work outside, working on oil wells, right? Very cold, constant 20-mile-an-hour winds that kind of blow in from the north, from the North Pole type of thing. But then you can see areas like California, right? The average life expectancy, it's a little hard to see right here, is pushing 87, right? So that's in the high 80s they live. You can see this area right here. This is Colorado, this is Denver, right? High life expectancy. You can see this area. So this is New York City right here. And this is down Washington, D.C., high life expectancy. And then you can see Florida, right, where the retirees move, okay? High life expectancy. So most of those people that are living a long time in Florida started somewhere up here, and then they moved down there, right? So it wasn't like they lived there their whole life. But the point is, you can see, like, this general area of the southeast, right? You're starting up here at Kentucky, over to Louisiana, over to Georgia, North Florida, right, that area. That life expectancy is actually lower, right? You're in the yellow range, right, which is 75 to 77. So just where you live in the U.S., which is a function of diet and activity, outdoors activity, which results in things like, or lack of a good diet or lack of exercise, right, results in, obesity and diabetes, things like that, and it increases sickness and it lowers the life expectancy on average. Okay? So here's kind of one of those, interesting things. So this is different eras of humanity, and you can see a lot of these things. These are the life expectancies. So just to throw out a couple of them, the Bronze Age, people lived to be an average of 26 years old. Okay, Classic Greek, right? Going back, you've seen the Greek statues and wacky movies and whatnot. They lived to be 25 to 28. Old Rome, right? Roman chariots, people lived to be 20 to 30. Medieval Islamic world, right? If you made it to a certain age, if you made it to 15, then you could live between 59 and 84, right? So a lot of times, a lot of these life expectancies are driven to low numbers because there's a lot of children and infants that die, which statistically drives the number down. Medieval England, right? There's always a couple shows on TV about people dressed in those wacky outfits. So the average age was 30, but if you made it to 21, then you could add on 43 years, and you can actually make it into your 60s. So big thing was making it to being an older teenager. France, right? The average age was between 27 and 30, right? And again, this is 18th century. We're not that far away. And you can see it's a little bit lower in Prussia. That's over in Eastern Europe, all right? And 18th century China, it was pushing 40, all right? Much healthier diet because they are very, I guess you'd say, vegetarian/vegan oriented. Fish and rice is a staple, whereas there's a lot of beef and pork up here. Okay. If you look at Japan, 41, they still lead the world in terms of the bigger countries. And then if you come here, England a little over 100 years ago was pushing 40, which was above the world average, right? And you can see between 1900, the average age was 31. 1950, this is after World War I and World War II, it jumped to 48. And then in 2017, it's up to 72, and that's average for the whole world. Okay, but you can see this dramatic increase in how long people live, which means that people are also healthier, because people aren't just, one day they just drop dead in the middle of the street. There's usually a disease and or an serious injury that can't be treated with these short life expectancies. So just kind of a couple of odd trivia things. There was a woman, Jean Clement, that lived to be 122 years old and 164 days. She lived in the U.S. She passed away in 1977. The oldest person today is 117 years, right? And he lives in Japan, born in January of 1903. I'll give you a rule of thumb is if you hit 80 in the United States, there is at least a 50% chance that you either have Alzheimer's or the early stages of Alzheimer's. So sometimes living to be 122 might not always be the best thing for some people. So let me talk a little about animals. So there's a turtle that lived in a zoo in India that lived to be 255 years old. All right, so that's fairly old. And I think it's been verified, but it's the oldest terrestrial or land-based animal that is known. So let me throw a couple of other odd ones out there that are pretty interesting. Okay, so microorganisms, because we're doing environmental stuff. So some endoliths live on the ocean floor, and they think they might be literally millions of years old. Right, they live in the colder water, very slow growth rates, and a constant source of the exact same nutrients. Okay, there are some actinobacteria found in Siberia, right, part of Russia, that are estimated to be 500,000 years old. Okay, so microorganisms are beating the pants off us for living a long time. So some other odd ones, just because it's kind of interesting how long some things can live. So there's some seagrass near Spain, right, in the Mediterranean Sea, and it's estimated to be anywhere from 12 to 200,000 years old. Okay, and that's one of those, obviously no one was there 200,000 years ago and keeping track of it, but they can estimate that from carbon dating and things of that nature. There's a type of aspen tree, a colony in Utah, right, that's estimated to be 80,000 years old. And this is really not like individual trees, like, we're used to, like, you have a, small pine tree or whatnot growing in your yard, you can pull it up by the roots and that's it. These things are all connected at the root. So it may be that one tree, is gone, but the root system has been there for 80,000 years. Okay, so 80,000-year-old tree. Okay, this one's kind of famous. It's called the Humongous Fungus, and it's a fungus species found in Oregon in a national forest. and it's thought to be the number that actually people think it's closer to 2,000 years, but at least 2,000 years old. So that goes back to the Middle East, the time of Christ, type of thing. So fairly old, and it's also the world's largest organism. It covers over 2,300 acres. Right, so this fungus is underground. You see mushrooms that pop up that are related to it, right? But it covers an incredible area, right? So it's the oldest and the biggest type of thing. And that's in Oregon, right? The northwest U.S. So a couple other ones here. They're Great Basin British cone pine tree. It has a ring count that measured this specific tree, to be 4,800 years old. The cypress of, I think that's in Greece, and I'm not sure, or it might actually be in Cyprus, is estimated between 2,000 and 5,000 years old. And yew is a type of tree. There's a Pacific yew tree that has a cancer drug in it called Taxol. But this particular tree is between 4,000 and 5,000 years old, right? And it's found in North Wales, right, which is north of England in the Scotland area. Okay, so trees can live to be very, very old if you have the right setting, obviously. Okay, in the ocean, you find some critters that live a long time there. Glass sponges, up to 10,000 years old. There's a coral species that's over 4,000 years old. Giant barrel sponges. These things can be 8 to 10 feet across and 8 to 10 feet high. They can live to be more than 2,000 years old. So when you mess up a coral reef, a few of you are in the marine chem class, right? It doesn't just pop back next year, right? These things they grow slow. They're gorgeous when they're growing, incredible life. But once you knock them out, you've done a lot of damage. And then there's another barrel sponge in the Caribbean. Looks to be 2,300 years old. And then there's this coral right here. It often is found in deeper water, but that can live to be more than 2,000 years old. So coral's actually a colony animal, right? It's made up of these little things called polyps, and they all colonize together. And when you see a picture of one, the nice purple coral or this or that, it's actually it's a colony. It has thousands of little things that help make it up. Okay, so that's a kind of a quick overview on some lifespans. So when you go through that geography packet and you look at lifespans, remember that it's related to a lot of things. I mean, it's related to how wealthy the country is. It's related to how clean the water is you drink. It's related to the ability to control disease. Right, you can see that now with our pandemic. I'll give you an odd fact. Is not that long ago, 100 years ago, malaria was a big thing in South Georgia and into Florida, right? So people got malaria, little children died from malaria, right? If you go into an old cemetery, it's 100, 150 years old, you'll see, maybe a third of the people buried there are small children or infants. Okay, so things have come a long way. Give you another statistic. In Florida, roughly in the year, I think 1905 or 1903, the largest city in Florida was Key West, and it had close to 25,000 people. Right now, Miami has millions, Orlando has millions, Tampa has millions. Those cities basically didn't exist. And around 1900, the city of Miami was basically a few orange plantations, right? There wasn't much there. And even now today, Miami is still the leading city in the U.S. For mosquitoes and for mosquito diseases. Okay, and so it used to be before air conditioning, before herbicides and pesticides, etc. Malaria, mosquito diseases ruled this area of the world. All right, so I'm about to send you a packet. Don't forget to pay attention to the email. It has all the deadlines in there, right? So you want to do the deadlines, right? There's a deduction for turning things in late. And be sure when it says write it by hand, you fill it out by hand, all right? And so a lot of this stuff, don't just whip through it. You'll find if you spend a little time with it, there's some really interesting things that make you appreciate where you are in the history of humanity, right? And helps you understand the world a lot differently. Okay, so be safe. And if you see that big guy coughing, run the other way. We'll see you later.